We are going to take a round of 3 questions, 2 from the audience, then 1 from the people are listening from the all over the globe. So, 1 question.
We stopped at this side.
Sorry, 1 question from you, and then from that end. Then I come back.
Thank you very much, Andrew Shepherd at ODI, Chronic Poverty Network. I sense that you want to avoid the blame discussion, and you've explained why, I think. You're arguing that this sort of approach of performance evaluation and comparing districts or local government units will succeed if actors take it on. I sense a reluctance to get the central government involved. You don't argue that the central government should make this a kind of central system in any way. And you say that it won't do any good if it happens from outside. And I don't know whether you include the central government as outside or not. No, okay. But next door you've got Rwanda with a very different approach, where mayors resign voluntarily rather than get the sack. And there they have district advisory councils that are scrutinizing what happens at the district level. You have an official league table, and you know all the details. I mean, clearly there's a massive difference in the political economies between Rwanda and Tanzania, and I'm not suggesting that there should be any, transfer from one to the other, but 2 very different approaches with, I suspect, potentially very different results. I don't know. I just wondered if you reflected on those differences at all.
Yeah. Please, when you ask the question, please tell us your names and your organization, as well as try to be as brief as much as you can. Please, Mike, to that end.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to the panel. It's Gareth Wall from the Commonwealth Local Government Forum. And I just want to follow on some of the points that Andrew brought up. Is one of the things that seemed a bit strange in the framing is that I don't know whether it's just because we're at ODI, but it seemed to be what can donors do and not what Tanzania can do. I didn't know why that seemed to be the focus. I don't know if that's because of the research and the grant, or you think that's particularly influential. I don't know. I was quite struck by... sorry, let me go in my notes. Where are we? They've disappeared. In terms of who, I thought the index was really interesting. In terms of who you were talking to, I didn't quite get an idea of, you're talking to citizens, councillors, local administration, NGOs, and if they all seemed to agree that these were the things that, or if there was any disagreement, and how you made those balances on the disagreements. Sorry, I've lost my notes now. Yeah, I'll carry on. I'll get back.
Later. Yeah. And we have a question from Lusaka, Zambia, from Moses Ngulube, from Lusaka, Zambia. Moses would like to hear more about how the short and long routes to accountability were creatively used in Tanzania to foster accountability and the responsiveness of local authorities. We have 3 questions, please. Audience, Anna, Timandi. I think it's Anna and Timandi. I don't see anything for you.
Okay, yes. No, we were counting central government as part of this, but I mean, this was particularly on the local government side. So one of the sort of lines of blame and accountability very much does look at where the blockages to central government come from, and quite a lot of the blockage at the local level is through the disbursements and the policy, the nature of policy, and this gap between what's written on the policy paper and, of course, what is possible in implementation practice, and the gap is very large in the Tanzanian context. This project has spanned a period of intense political change in Tanzania, in the sense of having the new government, the new president, who is very impressed with Rwanda and models himself on Kagame. So I think we could see a shift. And in one sense, we have a real opportunity with the project now because it fits the political mood in Tanzania, which is very much on local government performance. So if you wanted to use the index, and this is for central government, this could be a tool that they could use to look at what local governments are doing in a comparable way. And because what we really tried to take in our selection of the indicators was what is possible for local government to provide. What do they already have, and what should they be collecting data on if they were to assess the sort of inclusiveness of the policies as well? And we have a list of indicators here, but it's not to say we have data on all of the indicators, because some of these indicators there isn't data collected on. What we have got some indication of is the nature of disbursements coming from the central government, and we have quite a lot of data about the problems within the district from the central government issues. So those could be part of conversations from the district government to the ministries that they're dealing with then. And the political systems, the political party system as well, with all these other lines of accountability. So Rwanda could get closer to the Tanzanian model. I think there could be quite a lot of learning between those two things, particularly because that's the way the political mood's going. Gareth, you asked about donors. Well, in our project, no, the focus isn't on donors. It's very much on local government system, and not even on civil society, if I'm quite honest, because we found very little civil society engagement at the village level. We hear a lot about civil society within accountability discussions. Actually, I think we have to be quite careful because the presence of civil society is quite minimal, particularly at the village level. And we find them, yes, at the district level. But the debates, the sort of nature of the things they raise are very much shaped by the donor discourses. And so we have to be just a little bit careful about what's going on there. We really tried to get a very big spread of who we were talking to, and this is sort of anthropological, ethnographically based research, so it's very iterative. We're going back, cross-checking, triangulating what people are saying. The focus groups that we have and getting down to these last indicators are very much a process of discussion and trying to balance some of the different debates. I mean, for example, Patricia brought up the example of gender, and this came from civil society organisations feeling that they ought to be saying gender about every indicator because that comes in the donor discourse. But then when we get down to the practicality, how do we do that? What sort of data are we getting? So in some places like education, we can get gender disaggregated data much more easily than in others. So it's about then having the conversation about what is realistically possible. I don't think there was any more for me. I think it was Tim. Do you want to? Yes, Patricia, you
also, yes, some people were quite skeptical on the idea of indicators having index as well. But we are talking about the overall. Yeah, there are people who talked about data. Where do we get our data? Because when you look at the report, you will see that we have the perception of citizen. We also have information from the district council on the financial, the last year financial, what they received in terms of their budget. Mm-hmm. So when we were talking to people, they told us that when you get, if this data were not coming from the government, we would have trusted it more. So we don't trust that whatever they are giving you as information is actually what is true. So there were people who were quite skeptical, but overall, it was positive. Not to say that everyone did and they agreed to the idea of having indicators. Yeah.
Thank you. You want to say?
Yeah, I mean, on the comparison of Tanzania and Rwanda, I mean, Rwanda is a very different kind of, as you say, political economy from Tanzania. You have a high level of power concentration at the top of the system, and you have very strong formal institutions. So actually it's much easier to go in with a sort of conventional donor program and achieve targets, and also when the government has its own objectives, it's able to achieve those targets because, shall we say, the sinews of power work far more effectively in Rwanda than they do in Tanzania, where power, despite the fact that you have a dominant CCM party, power is actually quite dispersed, and you know, people at the top are often unable to make the decisions they take stick. And it's true that the current president appears to be trying to move Tanzania in a sort of Rwandan direction, but he will face a real political struggle to do that, I think, and I think the jury remains out on whether or not that will be feasible. I just want to answer this question about the short and long, how the short and long routes have been used in Tanzania. Well, you know, we've had a plethora of civil society strengthening programs and things like that in Tanzania, and I think that what's happened is that transparency has increased, but there's been a lag between transparency increasing and accountability increasing. So people do talk about transparency without accountability in Tanzania currently, although there are some improvements in accountability, I think, over recent large corruption scandals. And I think that the fact that Magufuli was chosen as the CCM candidate may in fact be a reflection of a growing concern among the ruling elite that corruption is actually hurting the political chances of the ruling party. And in terms of the short route, well, I mean, I think that the key thing is decentralization. But, you know, I started doing research in Tanzania in 1995, and this was when the decentralization was beginning. And, you know, 20 years later, it hasn't got that much further. And, you know, sometimes governments decentralize, governments decentralize for various reasons. Sometimes they feel that local level conflicts are threatening to engulf the centre, so they feel that by, decentralizing power, then they are able to protect the centre a bit better. Sometimes they feel that the behaviour of local officials is actually endangering the popularity of the centre, so by making local officials more accountable, it actually strengthens the centre. But it's not clear that either of these really applied in the Tanzanian case, and I feel that decentralization was really a donor-driven agenda which was initiated at a time when Tanzania was very donor-dependent, and that it hasn't actually been implemented with any degree of seriousness, and that's why you see a lot of these disconnects, a lot of these blockages, and now we seem to be moving towards an era of sort of re-centralization, if anything, especially because decentralization, one of the things it did achieve was to provide a base where some of the opposition parties could begin to strengthen themselves, and I think that the ruling party is trying quite hard to now kind of extinguish those local bases of the opposition. I'll stop there.
I'm going to take another round of questions, but before I come to this audience, I have one question from Sarah from Tier Fund. I would like to ask Analia, what is the role of digital media in Tanzania? We'll answer that later, maybe after listening from the audience.
Yeah. Duncan Green from Oxfam and LSE. Brilliant presentation, really interesting work. Thank you very much for this. I've been thinking about a comparable experiment in Vietnam in a sort of closed political space called PAPI, which does local government index and has been working for a few years. And the comparison's interesting because it goes a bit further than you're suggesting. So one, it got the government involved through mass organizations as a kind of way of legitimizing what was asking difficult questions. And it does and the second one is it does do a composite index. It actually puts 69 sort of areas in a league table. And the first time they did that, they got death threats. The following year, they got phone calls saying, how do you help us move up the table? So if you don't do a composite index, you actually give up basically the power of competition between local authorities. And I'm just wondering whether you think that that's it's worth looking at, because actually people want to beat their neighbours. And that's a really big motivating factor in all walks of life. That's one thing Oxfam's found from lots of different kinds of indexes.
Silvia Stefanoni, independent consultant. Thanks very much for the presentation. I have a question on it seemed to me what came true from the presentation, there is a lot of uneasiness about as we were just saying, index producing or any informal, more data gathering that is independent and provide evidence on auditing or that kind of, as does not seem to lead into potential actions and solutions. That's what I'm hearing. But what I'm interested in is there a role for the two types of data gathering? So one is a data gathering that got some independence or try to have some independence. For example, what is the role of the National Audit Office in Tanzania in this process? I would be very interested to hear what is your thinking around that.
Okay, now maybe one question for that, then 4 questions, then the audience and the panelists will answer. Your name again?
Good morning. I'm Marta Matosek from Social Development team at ODI. My question will refer to Analia. Specifically, I'm interested in the role of local media. You've mentioned that there are quite a few challenges being faced by the local media. And I would like to ask, what are the key inhibitors of engaging? And what do you mean by local media? Is it the radio station, newspapers, or we are also talking about the digital and social media, perhaps mobile phones? And do you have any examples, positive examples of how locally engaged media or initiatives produced a good response to accountability issues on the local level? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anna, let's start with you have two questions, then the rest, Anna and
I will start with Sarah, the question on role of digital media. In Tanzania, yeah, we have a lot of mobile people are on mobile phones and things like that, and it's part of social media. But we have a law, cyber law of 2015, which actually kind of prevent whistleblowers. So when it comes to accountability, there's a challenge in there because a lot of information is considered as a secret, government secret. So if you have something in relation to something wrong happening down there, you have to be very smart and very good in terms of evidence. Otherwise, you end up yourself being criminalized for that information. So we have that. That's why I'm saying if we have to kind of improve local governments, we need to align by the media laws, align by the laws of the Constitution, because the Constitution allows freedom of information. But the other laws like this one, cyber law, kind of prohibit people to actually give out information. So that is a critical challenge we have in terms of digital media. But the second question from what is her name? Martha. Is on the issue of local media. When I talk of local media, I mean media which are in the local geographical. I mean, like if we have radio, television, newspapers at the local level, at district level, which are based at the district level, they are based at the regional level, they are based at the village level. Those are what I'm considering. And according to the information I have, is that these are categorized in some of them are church, majority of them are church faith-based, others are like business-based. So majority of them, in that 80% of them, they are actually not talking of development issues. They are talking of religious issues. They are talking of business, like they promote music, they promote those kind of celebrity and things like that. They are not critical to development issues. So you will not hear them discussing about what budget this district have this year for water, for example. What kind of budget this district have for road this year, for example. So they'll be talking about faith issues, believing in God. You know, if you have this illness, you have to go to this church and whatever and whatever. They are not talking of the real issues which are causing those kind of problems, like if you drink water which is not safe, you get disease and things like that. And so I think we have that serious problem of also strengthening the capacity of the media to be able to engage effectively in development issues at the local level. Because for me, I believe you can have thousands of media around, but what is the agenda of this media? What are they discussing on air? If they are discussing about music, about beauty, about sexuality, they are not talking about real issues on budgets, on implementation of local government projects and things like that. For me, those media, they added very little value in terms of development. And that's where we have challenge in Tanzania. Yes, there is a freedom of media, established media, but what are the roles, development role they are playing? It is very challenging and very debatable, and we really need to do a lot to actually make media role effective in terms of making it media add value to development. That's what I would say. So, yeah. And if those media were actually working, they would do a lot in terms of sensitizing the local government on their role in terms of development. But because those media, local media, are not actually playing their development role effectively because of the setup, the mandate they've been given. And of course, somebody said because all these were donor-driven. It is, when something comes from people themselves, from the willingness of the government itself, that they want to see this, of course, they'll put even policies which are actually conducive. But for me, I suspect a lot of these things came from the top, and from the top will prevent from actually interfering a lot with what is on the ground. So, yeah, it's a big challenge.
Thank you. Helen, please.
I'd just like to draw together three of the questions in response, just make some observation around the question of composite indices and the use of those in accountability, and to refer back to Moses Ngulube from Zambia about long routes of accountability. There's a good example sitting in Uganda around a local government scorecard initiative that has done just as you described, which has ranked or has scored 30 district authorities against each other, and has been used to, in the first year you said there was the death threats. It wasn't quite death threats in Uganda, but it was disquiet about the results. The second year was how do we go up the agenda, which is the sort of the short route of accountability. How do we improve our services and get our ranking up? And the third bit, which is quite interesting, there's a case study that came out of the work that ACODE did in championing this local government scorecard, and the chairperson of Kabaroli in the 2016 elections cited the score that was for his authority within this scorecard as the platform on which he won that election and was re-elected. And not many people in Uganda at that local level were re-elected. So there's a political and long route to the accountability and the use of such indices if they are set against each other. And answering the other question about is there merit in the approach that has been taken, I think one of the key things about the research, and Anna alluded to it as we came into the discussion, it wasn't about trying to think about the scaling up and the looking, it was about the process. And actually, it's as much about the process and the opening of space for dialogue between concerned individuals, actors around a problem, than it is about the actual indicators and the data that comes up. The actual research hasn't got as far. It's established a baseline, but it hasn't had the data to say whether there have been improvements, whether it's actually been able to trigger an accountability response and improve service delivery. But just by having that dialogue, by opening up those channels of communication, by starting to crowd in the right people to have the conversation, I think there is a measure of accountability and value in that process.
Yeah, just to sort of follow up that. I've been reading a bit of literature around blame, and particularly in the sort of new public management approach to local government and things like that. And one of the problems of composite indexes and any of these sort of scoring mechanisms is the gaming that starts to go on as soon as you make those tables. And we see it very much in the UK context. I mean, LSE today has just been given a bronze rating for its teaching quality, for example. Just was reading it this morning. And exactly. So what will happen is now the government's ranking teaching of universities, the game shall commence in terms of how do we raise our statistics, how do we bribe students to say the right things on the right survey so that our index can go up. Universities have been playing this game for a long time around the research assessment exercises. And so gaming on these type of indexes is a serious problem, and that's what I would have certainly disquiet about, what gaming would suddenly go on around these transparency and blame processes in using those indexes. And one of the criticisms we now see of some of the indices, like the sort of Ibrahim governance index, is, well, we saw some shifts going on when we first had these things, but now we don't really see a great deal of shifting. In fact, we see some degradation in what was originally trajectories of change around governance, and that actually these indicators of governance don't always correlate with better performance in terms of service delivery. I mean, there's the ODI report on service delivery, which makes that point, produced by the governance team. So I think I'm naturally averse, I'm an anthropologist, I'm averse to the sort of quantification approach, but I can see it has value in some context. I think it would be a different project that we did that would scale this up to many levels, and it might be a next step from this type of research is to say, okay, well, how could you use this in a different way, not just the problem-solving tool, but as the comparative composite index, and what process would we then need to go for that, and how would we minimise the gaming of that approach?
Yeah, okay, thanks. I got like 5 minutes, so I want to acknowledge the questions from Clive Bacon, counterpart international in Zambia, who asked the same question about faith-based radios. So Anna and Leah addressed that. Also, I have Neil Webster from Danish Institute for International Studies, Copenhagen, asked the same question as the one Andrew Shefford asked. So we have answered that. Maybe I have 2 questions from the floor before I ask the panel to round up the discussion. 2 questions from the floor. 1, 2, maybe 3 from that. Okay, has the mic. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Yeah.
Try to be brief, please, because
my name is Marcus Manuel. I'm a senior research associate here at ODI. I had 2 questions. Firstly, while you've been doing this, of course, the world has been having a debate about indicators, and I wondered what overlap you saw or comparisons you saw with the SDG global goal indicators that are now coming out in the process. And secondly, given you referenced the issue around financing so much, I wonder whether you had costed how much it would do to produce these indexes on a quarterly, annual basis at this level. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jess Hayes from Integrity. We've been supporting the Legal and Human Rights Center in Tanzania and the Zanzibar Legal Service Center to develop a perception-based index on civil and political rights. And the key thing there is it's perception-based, because there's a real gap in data on a lot of the indicators that would that we would want to look at if it was set up like this. So I just wanted to get a sense. I know you're not scaling it up yet, but how you would see this working in practice in terms of collecting all this information, who would be collecting it, and how it would and how you would mitigate the issues around data gap. Thanks.
Yeah. Last question from the floor.
Claire Thomas, Deputy Director of Minority Rights Group. I just wanted to push Anna and Patricia a little bit on the point you made about inclusion. So I'm still not really clear how many citizens participated and whether they were sampled or whether and how far you were able to go. I'm worried about the Vietnam example about masking, so about having communities within hunter-gatherers, for example, haven't been mentioned, this wouldn't, if you did expand, you'd have to think again. And obviously, you've said it's very located in one sitting, but even within that setting, how did you, I'm not talking about gender, I'm talking about ethnicity, indigenous peoples, and disability hasn't been raised as well. So all of those other disaggregations, which brings us back to the SDG point that was raised then as well.
Okay.
They seem mostly for us.
Yeah. So two of you.
Yes, very much aware of the indicators debate going on around this. And I mean, I used to be within ODI, and then, again, very aware of the dialogue and the push towards quantification of many of these types of things. And I've worked a lot around gender, and quantifying within, say, women's empowerment is incredibly difficult and then problematic when you try and do it. And Sally Engel-Merry has just published a book, The Seductions of Quantification. I don't know if people have come across that. She was doing lecture tours recently, looking at how we sort of start to actually create and influence the debate. And again, it's a bit like the gaming of the system. We become led by the indicator rather than the concept and the issue that we're trying to solve. So I am quite wary of using these indicators as proxies, because there's quite a gap in understanding of what an indicator does. And that's about research literacy and data analysis literacy. How do we select an indicator? It's just a proxy for concepts that we're trying to get at, and concepts are often quite difficult. And even in things like inclusion, if we're talking about people with disabilities, who we're including when we've got a whole gamut of different disabilities, whose voices, and do the indicators we select then help us say that, or do we actually need to look more at the complexity and get better at working with some of the complexity? But of course, within development, we have an aversion to complexity because we want to have the simple indicators. We want to have headlines that we can all sign up to, such as within now the SDGs. So I don't think I can have more space to say much about that at the time. Maybe we can talk about that further outside. So going to the data that we have here, the baseline data has been collected in 3 different ways. A citizen perception survey, that is too small at the moment, and we know that, and that's because of the time of trying to get it. So that was 100 citizens purposely sampled for location, wealth, gender, occupation, so on. I've done a lot of this type of research at village level, at local community level in Tanzania, and really trying to look across the different divides and dimensions within local communities. We did a frontline workers survey about the conditions that they experience, the amount of equipment that they have, elements of inclusion within frontline services as well. So one of the indicators that we have is around, you know, what's the pass rate of the poorest cohort of children within the schools, for example. So we've tried to design the indicators so they do pick up some of these issues. They're not perfect by any means, and what we would expect to see is that these things would get developed. One thing, for example, that is supposed to pick up vulnerability would be around the conditional cash transfers. There is what is supposedly now a nationwide program of conditional cash transfers. We find it in the data very problematic in terms of who is being selected for those cash transfers, and a lot of misunderstanding at the local level. So we've tried to capture that within the indicators. We then have the district council data on the key issues, again trying to select what can actually local government do something about in selecting those indicators, rather than, you know, an issue that comes up a lot is access to electricity, but what can local government do about access to electricity if it's being provided by the central state company? So we come up with an indicator of whether public facilities have electricity or power sources. So it's very difficult. We've tried to sample as widely as possible, but it's incredibly difficult to get all those issues in, but we've tried to, in selecting the indicators, push towards questions of inclusion. We certainly picked up on things like pastoralist, land issues, community conflicts, because we've been going right to the village level, and with lots of life history interviewing in the first place. It was very embedded anthropological sort of research within the village communities to even generate the long list of indicators of saying what were the concerns, what were the different dimensions going on within the local sort of frontline experience. Anything else, Patricia? Do you want to add anything there?
We in terms of selection of the participants, it was we started off with a random selection so that we can get people from different backgrounds. We had a list of, we wanted people from like different ethnic group, from different religion to be in the same room. We had a list of things that we were looking for so that we can make up a group. But we have to go through the village leaders, because we cannot just go to a village without going through them. And we give them what's the list of disaggregation of what we are looking for. Then we work with them. It's not like they just go and tell us you go there, but we work with them so that we get what we wanted from in terms of participation. And when it comes to councillors, we ask the councillors, and whoever is available turn up on the day. So it's we did consider the fact that it has to be a mixture of people involved.
I mean, that was a phase 2 process.
Phase
so that
2,
was much more refining this, and then it was much more specific invitations. But we did go back out to the villages and the original interviewees as well for the feedback.
Okay, thank you, my team. Now I want to end up the discussion. I'm going to invite every member of the panel to just for at least 40 seconds to give just to round up. I start with Helen, then towards that direction, please.
Okay, the question that I was told was the roundup question was how are we going to improve all of this? I think one of the things that comes out of the research very, very strongly is making time and space for the conversations to happen, paying attention to process and what comes out of that process, and making sure that there is, from that process of dialogue, problems are surfaced and the right actors are in the same room to find the solutions. I think in that process, as well as a focus on the indicators, which will be necessarily sort of quantitative, the qualitative nature of the discussion is something else that would go alongside this research to actually capture the nature of the issues that are coming out from citizens and villagers who are actually facing the reality of poor service provision, and from that the stakeholders can produce something further. So time and space and attention to process would be my recommendation for going forward.
Analia?
For me, I would like to say the citizen voice is very critical in enhancing local government accountability. So for citizens to be able to hold the government accountable, they need to have facts-based information. And this facts-based information will only be able to reach the people through the media. So all project implementers, they need really to ensure that media are involved. So my recommendation will be that there is a need to sensitize local government councils, key officials, on accountability and the importance of engaging the media throughout in everything, not only when donors are opening, they are coming to give the money. They have to be engaged throughout, through planning, implementation, monitoring, and the like. And I would also like to recommend that there should be continued research on local government accountability. The initiative of Anna and the rest need to continue because they'll be able to tell us what happens next and things like that. And another important thing is that as Tanzanians, I think we need to align with the media, with the Constitution, so that the media are able to engage effectively in dissemination of information on local government accountability. And the last, I think we need to strengthen the mainstream media and the local media. Why? Because when media is informed, they can write critical news. And the critical news doesn't mean bad news, no. When media is able to kind of disseminate information about good things, it's also important for the people to understand what is happening on their localities, what the local government is doing, what the problem the local government is facing. Because at times, people are just skeptical because they have no information. They suspect everybody is a thief. Yet, maybe there's no money because the money, maybe donor did not bring the money, or maybe the government has not been able to collect taxes effectively to be able to implement the projects. But people are not informed. They are left in the darkness. And this is the role which media could play, but media is not engaged effectively and strategically in development projects. So for me, I would appeal for whoever actually is doing development projects in Tanzania to consider the media role. Media people, journalists have to be informed. They have to be part of the process. Thank you.
Sorry, Anna.
Thank you.
Okay, I've said a lot, so I'll try and keep it really brief. I think it's just a plea for when all our various organisations, civil society, NGOs, universities, and are working on these type of accountability projects, let's think about some of the research that's out there. There's quite a lot of research now about how complicated accountability lines are, but there are still so many projects that assume simple accountability as a theory of change. Please, in theories of change, look at the literature that already exists. We don't need more literature on this. It's already out there. So please, let's talk to each other in terms of designing these type of projects and programs.
Patricia?
What I've realized doing this project is that it's quite important to think about the people where we go to collect information. They are not stupid. Whatever outcome we get, we should also think of going back to them and giving them feedback. They often give, but they don't take anything back. They want to learn as much as we want to learn as well. We go learn from them, we have to give them the outcome. And that's something that came strongly throughout the 3 years because people appreciated the fact that it wasn't about the outcome, it was just the fact that we went back to them. And for those who remember, they were quite proud that we came back to them and they were happy to talk to us again. Although some of them were quite reluctant to talk to any sort of researcher in the future, but they were quite happy to talk to us just for the fact that we went back and gave them feedback. And I think they deserve it because they talk to us a lot, but we just consider them as people who need to tell us, then we move on and pass on the information to other people. We never go back to them. So that's something that we should learn from this process.
Yeah, thanks very much. I really like this piece of research. I like the approach of building bottom-up, locally meaningful indicators and using them as a focal point or a starting point for a conversation about how to solve problems. I acknowledge that there is a tension between having that kind of data and having nationally comparable data. The different types of data can do different types of things. But I think it's interesting that in this project, both the Kigoma and the Mvomero studies actually produced similar sets of indicators. So in fact, one may find that in practice that tension becomes resolvable and that over time it is possible to actually scale this. But I think nevertheless, even if it's scaled, the bottom-up element needs to be retained, because I think a national program which tried to impose this from the top down would probably be less effective.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I want to bring up this discussion to an end, but before I do that, really, me as a chair, what I've learned from this discussion is that really any attempt or exercise of developing such index is so complicated and you cannot simplify it. How that's one, but also we've seen that from the audience, whoever's spoken, that there's a need of engaging citizens and the media. And the call is whoever is doing, whether it's an academician or any practitioner, any attempt of engaging citizens and the media, there's a possibility of producing a very good kind of, in terms of improvement, rather than thinking that anything coming from top. So that's my take home, that citizens and the media should be part in the process for whatever we do as practitioners and academicians. I want to thank you, audience, for coming this place, but also I want to thank you all those who have been following up this discussion from all over the world. But and a huge thanks to my team on the high table. But also I don't want to forget Sophie. Where's Sophie? She's done a wonderful job to be able to organize this event. So I want to again also to appreciate your contribution towards this event. So I thank you very much and have a beautiful and blessed day. Thank you.